Do you think, Pat? Should we get started?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay. Okay. First things first, let me introduce myself. My name is Vince Smith with Valley Forge Audubon Society, and I'd like to welcome everybody here to our program about grassland birds and managing grasslands for birds. A couple housekeeping items I'd like to address. The first is please put yourself on mute and take yourself off video. I want to give you a heads up that this program will be recorded. So if you know somebody who wasn't able to attend and they would like to view this presentation, they can always go to our website and they can watch the presentation on the recordings. We will also have the presentation, and then after the presentation, we will open it up for questions. We will also have a chat, and you can enter any of your questions into the chat. And with that, I would like to first welcome Zoe Warner. Zoe, first of all, a little bit of a side note. I appreciate Zoe taking the time today. And I think that this presentation is really important for those of us who are really concerned about grassland species. And as a matter of fact, part of the genesis of this for myself is I'm just, shall we say, just devastated every spring when in the middle of June the mowers are going through the meadows, and basically the realization that a lot of these grassland species are being chewed up every season, and it's just heartbreaking. So, and um, I don't think people realize that that is what potentially is taking place. So we thought it would be great to have some type of a presentation where people can understand proper management of meadows. So Zoe is the program manager for the Grassland Bird Collaboration. She researches beneficial practices for grassland birds that rely on Chester County's agricultural landscape for survival. And this research includes monitoring grassland bird behavior during the breeding season and tracking local and migratory movement using MODIS technology. She has a PhD in environmental planning from the University of Pennsylvania. And with that, Zoe, I'd like to turn everything over to you.
Thank you. Well, and as Vince said, this is a presentation to sort of go through the work that we've been doing in Chester County and hopefully spark people's imaginations in terms of what might be possible where you're located. Our first slide is, I start with this one just to set the tone. No, just kidding. I'm sure everybody is familiar with the 3 billion birds study. We've lost 1 in 4 birds since 1970. And it's, as Vince just mentioned, it's sort of thinking about these vanishing voices and the void that will be left if these birds if we don't do something to reverse these declines. And then when we look at individual bird groups, grassland birds are experiencing the greatest declines of any bird group. So we've lost 720 million grassland birds since 1970. So in the State of the Birds report that came out in 2022, and they were talking about the status of different land birds, of course, grassland birds had experienced the greatest declines. And so what that boils down to is that 2/3 of grassland birds have experienced population declines. And then 1/4 of those birds are actually considered tipping point species. And that means that they've lost 50% or more of their population since 1970. And they're on track in the next 50 years to lose another 50% if changes aren't made. So when kind of drilling that down to our local area, the focal species that we have that are the most common breeding grassland birds are bobolinks. And among North American populations, we've lost 3 and 5 bobolinks, 3 and 4 eastern meadowlarks, and 2 and 3 grasshopper sparrows. So when you start to look at those gray birds there, it gives you a real sense of heaviness in terms of the work that we're required to do. So all of that is the bad news, but I do want to say there is good news. And that in that State of the Birds report, really they said that there's hope for these birds, and it really depends on us, the key constituents, landowners, farmers, and conservation partners who can work together to reverse these declines. And in fact, locally, we have an opportunity to help these birds before they're endangered. And really, this is the time to act, because once a bird is on the endangered species list, what needs to happen to bring those birds back is daunting. So we don't want to get to that point. And there are many opportunities along the way to start to address this. So that really is kind of why the Grassland Bird Collaboration came about. It was the idea that farmers and landowners and conservation organizations can work together to conserve these populations that rely on these agricultural lands, and establish a working conservation landscape that connects these agricultural lands to nature preserves, and that also creates a balance between agriculture and habitat. So the focal area where we're working is in Chester County. And so the county actually has designated a large portion of the county as rural resource areas. So that's the area that's in gray there. And then within that rural resource area, we have our focal conservation area, which is in green. And this is an area that's over 25,000 acres of pretty much contiguous agricultural land. And this has been 40 years in the making, this area. So it was part of the King Ranch Preservation Area 40 years ago, which started this sort of ripple effect that's moved out from there to preserve a large portion of Chester County, southern Chester County, for agricultural uses. And so that little dot there is Doe Run Village, and that's really in the heart of the King Ranch area. And that's where we started and have sort of moved out from there with our work as well. So when we think about grassland birds, it's important for us to understand their needs to be able to provide for them. So the first thing is they prefer large open hay fields and pastures that have ample interior area. So just because they're grassland birds doesn't mean they're going to be just in any field. The field, sort of the minimum threshold for a field is about 25 to 30 acres. And then depending on the way that that field is configured, it's more or less likely to have those birds in that field. So for example, if it's a sort of a square field with lots of interior area, that's a more attractive field than one that, is a longer, narrower field that has much more edge to it, because really on the edges is where predators lurk. That's where danger is. So those birds want to put their nests in the safety of that interior area. The other thing they need is a sort of a moratorium period when those fields are not going to be disturbed. So that no-mow period, and as Vince mentioned, coming into a field in the middle of June, that's really when these birds are breeding. So the cycles aren't matching up. So they need this period. And depending on the species, it's longer or shorter. So for meadowlarks, their nesting period is about 55 days. Bobolinks, it's about 40. And grasshopper sparrows, it's 30 to 50. So that has to be a period when there's no disturbance in the field. And then the other thing is they need the connectivity of the fields. So if you had this wonderful 30 or 40 acre hayfield surrounded by suburban development, it's much less likely to have these birds than if it was a 30 or 40 acre field next to a 50 acre field, next to a 60 acre field, that sort of thing. So these birds don't just stay put in one field. They move around, they breed, forage, and prepare for migration across the landscape. So the agricultural belt in southern Chester County meets these requirements, and it provides an opportunity for these birds. But that's not the only game in town. There are other areas in southeastern Pennsylvania that would provide similar environments and are sort of ample grounds for these birds to be able to breed in. So just to take a step back a little bit, I thought I'd kind of walk you through the evolution of how this Grassland Bird Collaboration came to be. So in 2014, I was doing my dissertation research in the southern Chester County, and I was doing bird surveys using bird location data and landscape metrics to predict where you might find these birds across the landscape. So I was able to develop this map, which is a sort of a probability map where the fields that are darker in color have a higher probability of having these fields based on the way the fields are configured and also their relationship to each other. So you can see the little blue dots are where I did the surveys, and then the predictions go across the fields there, across the landscape. So, I think what I found from my research was, yes, it's important to know where these birds are. It can, my hope was that it would help aid in preservation decisions in terms of judging a field. If two fields were equal, but one was expected to have a higher probability of birds, would you focus on preserving that field over another field? But beyond that, what I realized was that management for these birds is really important. So yes, we want to know where they are, but even more so, we want to know what we can do to enable them to breed successfully. So in 2020, I joined with Willistown Conservation Trust, and we spent 2 years documenting breeding behavior and the timing of the breeding cycle to help make management decisions. And then we also began tracking local and migratory movement using MODIS technology. So one summer in 2021, we were doing nest searching, and this wasn't meant to be sort of like, finding every single nest in the field, but we were more looking to kind of get a sense of timing of the nesting cycle. So we went out towards the beginning of the second week of June to the end of that week, and were able to find young birds. And by aging them, we were able to then project out when they would be strong enough to fly and essentially get out of the way of the mowers so that it would be safe to mow those fields. So I got to say, there's really nothing cuter than a little baby bobolink, but boy, they are hard to find because they make these little tiny cups of grass on the ground, and then it's covered by all this thatch of hay. And we actually had the experience of staking right near a nest, walking away, coming back to find it, and not being able to relocate it because they're that well hidden. So good for them, right? Because it's protection for them. So now I'm started telling my stories and I forget. By aging them, we realized that after July 1st would be a safe time to mow. I don't know if I mentioned that or not. And then the other thing we did was we were tagging birds. So you see there in the middle, that's one of the nano tags, and it kind of fits around the hip bones, and it is sort of like a harness, and then it has this trailing antenna. And then when a bird passes a tower or a local station, its location will be detected and recorded. So we had our little makeshift field station there, and we watched those birds toy with us for a bit. They love to just sit on the trammels and sing away. We just had to wait for them to finally make a mistake and get into the nets. But we were finally successful, and we processed the birds and took a little mug shot to remember them and sent them on their way to gather data for us. And it was interesting to see what they came back with. So that one map in the lower left there, that's one bird's movements after really the peak of the breeding season in that period when it was preparing for migration. So each color there represents one 24-hour travel period. So this bird was moving in a sort of 25-mile area back and forth in preparation for leaving finally to go south for the winter. And then the map in the middle is a composite map of all the birds that we were tracking and their movements, their migratory movement and pathway down to their wintering grounds. So in 2022, we continued with the tagging, and we actually added meadowlarks in. And then we also had a student from Penn who was interested in looking at how land management influences where you would find these birds. So with the meadowlarks, it was part of the Meadowlark Migratory Connectivity Project, which was run by the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center. And they had 12 different sites across the US where they were tagging eastern and western meadowlarks. And really their interest was in looking at how those migratory paths overlapped. So we deployed 5 satellite GPS tags, and you can see one of those tags on the back of that meadowlark there. It's a much beefier tag, a much heavier tag. The benefit of using a GPS tag is they don't have to pass by a MODIS tower to be detected. They send a location every 24 hours. So there's less, there's more flexibility in that, but they are heavier tags, so they really can't be used for songbirds. So as part of this, we found that our birds actually don't end up moving that far. Our birds were moving from really only down into Virginia over the wintering time. And then we also had our student, as I said, who was looking at different field management types. So he looked at early mow hay fields, late mow hay fields, and then row crop fields, and which would be mostly corn and some soy, and then wheat and rye fields. And so going back to that map that I had shown you in the beginning, he actually went into areas where I hadn't been. So it was really gratifying to see that areas that were expected to have these birds in the fields, they were there. And then from there, the other thing that he found was just that these fields actually were collectively beneficial to this. It was a wider group of birds. So it included kestrels, horned larks, purple martins, and savanna sparrows, in addition to the 3 focal species that we've been working with. So they had different preferences for fields, but one of the things that was sort of interesting was the row crop fields tended to have these birds in them, and it was horned larks prefer that open area between the corn, and also kestrels are able to hunt in there. So the least productive fields were the wheat and rye fields, which was a disappointment to one of our farmers because he kept thinking, boy, you're going to have all these wonderful seed heads. Aren't these birds going to come in? But when we were doing our surveys, we didn't see so many. But I think the thing that was probably most impressive to us from the work that was done was that there were preferences among our focal species for different types of fields. So our bobolinks were only in late mow fields. Our grasshopper sparrows were only actually breeding in early mow fields. And then the meadowlarks were able to breed in both. And we've confirmed this since then in subsequent years. But so it kind of opened our eyes to the idea that not all of the grassland birds need the same conditions. So our thinking with the grasshopper sparrows is that sometimes those late mow fields can get a little dense, and it may be too much for them because they prefer sort of patchier or just kind of differences in the structure. The other thing is that they breed later than the other 2 species. So having those fields come off earlier may not affect them because they're able to come in after that mow and then establish their nests and begin breeding. So that's been, his findings have informed our later decisions in terms of engaging farmers and landowners. So, we had years of data then, and this picture that I'm showing you here is one of the first slides that I showed to our landowners and farmers when we first met with them at the end of 2022. And it was really, I think, important that we had gathered data for years because it showed we were able to talk about these birds in a sort of a deeper way than just saying, well, you got these birds in your field, you should really do something about it. And I think it also kind of sparked the imagination of the people that we had gathered with. They could see the importance of their little spot of earth, and also they could see how doing something could make a difference for these birds. And so that was really the impetus to kind of starting this bird-friendly management that we've been promoting. So in 2023, we launched the Grassland Bird Collaboration. And we had a sort of a four-pronged model that we've been following since then. And the first is that we want to work with the farmers to prioritize fields for participation in the program. So we understand that our farmers have a lot of, they're dealing with a lot. They have a lot of different factors that they have to contend with. And we don't want, our job is to not make it more difficult for them. So we wanted to kind of figure out which fields would work for them to hold off on, and also kind of in our minds have a sort of a rank of which fields we'd love to have in late mow management. The other thing is for us is to be responsive, to provide responsive management to the farmers. So based on what the birds are showing us in the field, we can go back to them and give them insights into what would be helpful. So for example, we had one field where it was kind of separated. Bobolinks and meadowlarks were breeding in the upper part of the field, but the lower part of the field really was not really productive for breeding. And my farmer called me and said, you know, I really would want to come in and take some hay if it's possible. I'm not going to do it if it's not, but you know, can we talk essentially? And I said, yeah, we're not seeing anything in that lower field. So come in and take the hay. So he was able to fulfill his needs. And then we were also able to preserve the area that was important for breeding. And these are the kinds of things that are, I think, important in communicating with the farmers and then also with the landowners so they understand what's happening on their properties. And then so a lot of times the more they know, the more connected they are to it and want to make different conservation management choices. And then the last thing is just keeping the larger community happy and involved with this. So one of the things that I had seen when I was going through doing my surveys was that it was typical to start seeing fields come down around Memorial Day. And there really wasn't a farming reason for it, but it was because people just, it was tradition and that's what you do. And so once one field came down, the farmers tell me, you know, I'd start getting phone calls, when are you coming out? So, you know, the fields are going to look different when you're mowing later. And so it's understanding why those fields are looking different, and then also building an appreciation for making those changes. And so it's our job then to kind of communicate with people so they can understand what's happening and why these changes are happening. So we were, you know, put this plan into action essentially, and have been sort of monitoring what's been happening over the last 2 years. So our first action item was to enroll fields in this delayed mow commitment. So we've actually been able to enroll over 1,500 acres in late mow management, which means that they're mowing after July 1st. And in addition to that, we actually have what we call observational acres, and those are the areas in blue. So we had 500 observational acres last year. And that means that bird activity is monitored, but we're not asking them to alter their management. So it's a chance for us to see what's happening in these fields, to see if these are productive fields. And then if they are, for us to be able to go back to the landowners and have an opportunity to maybe talk about any changes or bringing those fields into our program. The other thing we're continuing to do is monitoring, because we have found that it is really essential to understand what's happening in these fields and to be able to constantly update the farmers and landowners. So over a 2-month period, we have 4 survey periods, and these are sort of snapshots in time. So we're not out in the fields every day, but what we are able to do is sort of watch the breeding season progress. And our hope is that by July 1st to July 15th, we're seeing a tapering off, that, you know, the birds have nested are successfully fledging, and that hopefully the fields are quiet during that period. We're also continuing to use wildlife tracking technology. And I will say, in terms of our work, it's informative, but I think it's also an engagement tool, which has been very important. When you're able to see movements of birds and kind of create a map and place these birds on the landscape, I think it can just create a sort of a more concrete understanding of what's happening. So some of the things that we have learned have been really interesting, and I think it's certainly been well received by our constituents who, didn't know. It's like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's interesting. So it's always interesting. It's good to be able to spark that with people. So one of the things we found is that the bobolinks are using non-breeding fields to extend their habitat. So we tagged birds at Schoolhouse Farm and Buck and Doe Farm, but we placed sensor stations at Buck and Doe and DuPont. And so our schoolhouse birds were moving to Buck and Doe and DuPont for foraging or perhaps, extra copulatory mating or whatever it was, but they were not just sticking on their breeding field. They were actually moving across into the local landscape. Another thing that we found is that certain fields become important at different times. So I've mentioned staging a few times. And we actually have this field that's managed differently. It's not mowed, it's grazed, and then they'll do some mowing late in the season, like in September or something. And this is not a breeding field, much to our landowners' sadness. He loves these birds, and he's always saying, "Don't you think they're going to breed here?" And the thing I keep telling him is, your field is so important because after breeding, this is where they all come. So that field, you can kind of see it. There's a valley there, kind of cuts off the sight line. So I guess it's not ideal for them to be breeding there. But once the fields around them are mowed, they start moving up to this field, and you'll just see, one blade of grass will have 4 bobolinks sort of dripping off of it, and they're just gorging themselves on the insects and seeds in the field. And so there's actually a Motus tower there, and you can see one of these birds that was tagged had almost constant detections for a week when it was just there continuously in preparation for migration. So this is an important field for that post period. And the other thing that's really interesting about this field is that the birds used to arrive at this field earlier, but as fields around it started mowing later, they've arrived later. So we can see the impact of late mowing and how it shifted these sort of local cycles, which is pretty neat. And then we have a 3-year map now of our migratory bird data. And so one of the things that's emerged is that the Delmarva is a very important stopover for these birds. So the majority of our birds over the 3-year period have stopped somewhere in that Delmarva Peninsula. So the more we understand about these sort of seasonal hotspots, it can also then inform management in those areas. And hopefully there are things that they can do to ensure that that habitat is available for those birds during that crucial time. And one of my favorite things that we've done is we've been able to recapture some birds. And these birds were recaptured in the same breeding field. The one at the top, he was recaptured the year after, but the one on the bottom was recaptured with a year of separation between. So it just shows that site fidelity that these bobolinks have. So if these fields are left standing year after year, these birds will be coming back. And then, the data that we have is interesting to show how these birds had similar migration routes in 2 years. And in fact, sometimes they were detected by the same station with a separation of a year or 2. And they also had sort of different migration strategies. So the bluebird ended up flying over the Atlantic to go south, where the orange bird was hugging the coast. Although one year it's sort of hard to see, but the bluebird actually was detected over Key Largo before it went south. So I think having these individual birds and their maps and sort of telling the story of their journey, it can bring these birds more to life, I guess, and kind of it makes us realize that each bird has this individual life and like how it's connected to our local landscape. And so I think it sort of captures my imagination to just think of this journey of this one little bird, because we talk about populations, but populations are made up of individuals. And then one last thing that we have done with our data was 2023, we actually extended the battery life of some of our tags that we put out. So we were able to actually track their spring migration as well. And so that just gives us more insight into their migration strategies and habitat use throughout their entire life cycle. So the one sort of difficult part of this is that the number of MODIS stations in South America is very few. So you don't end up having too many detections once they get past really out of the United States, but the Caribbean is extending its network. But for the bird on the left, it left in September from, looks like North Carolina or so in that yellow dot, and then it started coming back up. Stopped in Jamaica and then went to Florida before coming back up to this area. And the bird on the right actually had a pretty similar pattern from fall to spring in its migration route. So all of the data, I think, just kind of brings these birds to life in new ways. And you never know what will be somebody's entree with these birds. But I know one thing that has been very successful is the outreach events that we've held, and because there are no better ambassadors than the birds themselves for this program. So we've actually been out in the field during peak breeding season, and you see the bobolinks burbling up from the ground, or go and look over and there's a meadowlark plaintively singing from the fence post, or looking down and there's you hear this sort of chirping sound, or it sounds like an insect, and you realize, oh no, that's a grasshopper sparrow kind of weaving through the grass. So when people hear these sounds and are in the fields with these birds, they become excited, I think, and think about what they can do. And so that's where providing educational materials is very important. So one of the questions that often came up is, well, what can I do? I mean, clearly these birds need us, so what can I do? So we produced this field management guideline, which kind of gives insights into the individual birds' needs, but then also gives a calendar of high times for or the worst times for mowing versus safer times. And this is just something that we're hoping that people hold on to and can refer to and kind of help to inform their management decisions. And so we were actually quite lucky when we produced this to have our local partner, the Buck and Doe Trust. They have a newsletter that sort of actually the footprint is pretty much our focal conservation area. So they sent this out, and it was a standalone piece that people were able to take out and hopefully hold on to and refer to. And so that's really the last part of our action plan, is to partner with other conservation organizations, because conservation dollars are always too short, and not we can't do enough work that we need to do. So the more we can stretch those dollars, the better. So being able to see where we have overlap and we can pool our resources, it's really helpful in working towards greater conservation gains. So all of this was all of the work I think that we've done was important to receiving a grant from the Cornell Land Trust Bird Conservation Initiative. So over the last 2 years, they've awarded the project $50,000. And they actually have awarded several grassland bird conservation projects this grant. So they're focusing on grassland bird conservation. And this grant has actually been really beneficial to us in terms of thinking creatively about how do we continue to extend out from our initial what we have started, how do we grow from there? So when I think about some of the elements of success, they're probably a lot of them are kind of go back to that Cornell grant, and then also kind of our approach from the beginning. So the first thing was that we engaged farmers and landowners from the beginning to work in partnership. This was never meant to be some kind of prescriptive thing where, we're trying to tell them, you must do it this way. This is the only way, because we're learning as we're going through. So having more of that sense of collaboration, I think it's gotten us further than we would have if we tried to come in and start dictating how things have to be. Also, research, you can probably catch the theme on this one. This has been very important in terms of showing the importance of these individual properties. So monitoring fields during the breeding season, it gives us a chance to show how the birds are using individual fields, and then kind of building an understanding of how they're using fields across the landscape. So this picture looks kind of like some dots and X's and stuff, but when you focus in a little bit, you can see we're able to track where the birds are not breeding or where they've had a failure to breed. And then over time, we're able to sort of hopefully build a picture. I mean, we've only been doing this a few years, but the idea is we can see where the hot spots are or where there may be problem areas. So for instance, there's a field that had breeding bobolinks in 2023, but in 2024 they weren't there. So we'll be interested to go back this year and see if the bobolinks have returned, and if not, then we can turn our attention to what does that mean? How does that? Is there anything that we can do on our end? So that's what I think the power of monitoring is to constantly keeping us thinking about how we build for this program. And then we've also used tracking technology. So we're actually moving into a new phase. So last year, having been able to recapture these birds, it inspired us to actually change the tags we use. So we used geolocators last year, which are, they don't have to pass by a tower to have a detection. They'll just, they use daylight to estimate location. So the beneficial part of it is that no matter where the bird is, you'll be able to track them. The difficult part is you've got to get that tag back before you get any data. So that will be our challenge this spring, is to actually recapture these tags. But we're hoping to see, if we're able to, really shed some light on that winter activity that they have. So wish us luck on getting those darn tags back. Also, I think building flexibility into our model has been very important. So going back to that study that Liam did, it kind of sparked in us this idea that, it's not just late mow that's important. And so the more we can think about how each piece of this landscape is sort of like a patch in a patchwork quilt, we can sort of have a greater imagination about how this landscape benefits these birds. So we're still focusing on the majority of our fields being late mow, but we're also incorporating early mow fields and also looking at row crop fields that have hay strips in them, because we found that grasshopper sparrows can be found in those hay strips, and then you have horned larks that are in the cornfields. So really thinking of the landscape as a mosaic, and kind of seeing what each piece can provide for these birds, I think is important to layering on benefits. Also, as I mentioned, the Cornell grant has facilitated relationship building. So sometimes land trusts, it can be hard to collaborate because, as I said, our resources are limited, and it's, you sort of, it's sometimes you don't see where there's overlap. So we've now been able to work with Brandywine Conservancy and Natural Lands, and it's been just such a wonderful collaboration that we've been able to develop. So with Brandywine, they've been responsible for preserving the majority of the area of the fields that we're working in. And so they have these longstanding relationships with their landowners, and then they can provide entree for us to meet these landowners if we're not able to if we haven't been able to contact them up to this point. So all those areas in red there are fields that we'd like to see what there are possibilities of including in our program, and Brandywine is helping us to kind of get in front of those landowners. And then with the natural lands, they have all these, they have a number of preserves with grasslands in them. So they're demonstrating beneficial management practices, and they're also open to this wider public that can see these birds in action. And there's also educational materials there. So this is a way of expanding out in terms of getting people to see these birds and to also understand their needs. And it's also the grant also kind of encouraged us to seek unconventional partnerships. So one of the big connections that I haven't mentioned yet is that Kennett Square is the mushroom capital of the world, and they actually prefer late season hay. So they want that hay that's been sort of drying out in the fields. And so it provides a market for our hay producers. They don't have to just be providing horse hay or cattle hay. So we're working with the American Mushroom Institute to reach a new constituency, mushroom farmers and compost facilities that supply mushroom houses, to see where we can have overlap with them. And the other thing we've done is to build on our relationships to extend conservation outcomes. So the Pennsylvania Game Commission has a separate kestrel box project in southeastern Pennsylvania, but we have been able to, in a lot of cases, have them put kestrel boxes on the fields that are involved with the Grassland Bird program. So once again, it's sort of layering those benefits. And so some of the most successful boxes are in this doe run area in fields where we're actually doing monitoring of the grassland birds. So anytime we can sort of build on our successes, the better it is for the birds. Whoops, sorry. And then the last thing is just focusing on outreach and engaging the larger community. So we have been successful in having placement in local media outlets. We had a really wonderful story produced by WHYY. They came out to the fields, recorded the birds, talked to landowners and farmers. And if you want to look it up, it was released on July 1st of 2024. We've also been in local newspapers, and so it's using these opportunities to get out in front of other people. And as I mentioned, Buck and Doe Trust has this newsletter that comes out in the spring and fall. And so they're always willing to have us write something about the grassland birds. So we're kind of keeping people updated on what's happening with the birds, and keeping that story active and in front of them. And then the other thing is just these guest speaker opportunities. So I'm really grateful to be here, to be talking about this in front of you, and to be sort of spreading the word, because one of my hopes for this project is that the Grassland Bird Collaboration can sort of extend beyond the area where we are. So we'll always have our sort of local focal area in terms of our monitoring, that sort of thing, but we would love to bring other organizations or groups or individuals kind of in under this umbrella, where we can provide consultation services, or just kind of connecting them to this larger network of other like-minded people who are conserving grassland birds. And so it's sort of this idea of like creating hopefully there are different pods will emerge, and it will kind of be all part of this larger network that will be extended beyond the area that we've started in. So in terms of 2025 and beyond, or what our next steps are, one is we want to expand the boundaries of our working conservation landscape. So continuing to use this flexible management approach and to include new farmers and landowners. So this is our sort of target map. The fields that we already have participating are observational fields, and then those priority fields that we want to go after. And so just to kind of give you an example of how some of this evolves, that field that I've highlighted in yellow there, it's a field that is, it's a mixture of row crop and hay, and it was one of our observational fields last year. So when we got out there, we had our 3 focal species, although our bobolinks weren't breeding there. But we also had savanna sparrows and horned larks and field sparrows. And so after the breeding season was over, we met with the farmer and shared our findings with him. And he said, you know, he's a dairy farmer, and he said, I really can't hold that field until after July. It doesn't really work with, you know, my goals for the field. But he said, what if I take that hay off earlier, since you said these early mow fields can be beneficial? Do you think if I got it off early enough that the bobolinks would be able to come back? And so he's planning on taking that field off, I think maybe around May 15th, before the birds have gotten their nests established. And then we're going to go in and see what happens, with the hope that what we're hoping to happen will happen. But it's just that idea of going into somebody's, you know, farm office and sitting down and actually having a conversation like that. It's pretty exciting to have that that collaborative feel. The other thing we're working on is to get to work with NRCS to adjust their safe mow dates. So right now, we don't pay our farmers anything to delay their mowing, but there are farm bill programs where they can enroll, like in the conservation stewardship program, to, if they promise to delay mowing, they can have compensation for that. But right now the date on that is August 15th, and that's just really way too late for our farmers and really to get anything productive off of the land in terms of having saleable hay. So actually, Virginia Working Landscapes has been doing research, looking at they've done exhaustive nest searching and then looking at fledge dates and that sort of thing. And what they found was if you mow after July 1st, 80% of the successful nests will fledge. And so that does mean that you will have some percentage of loss after July 1st, but they have been successful in getting NRCS to change their date. And one of the things they say is that if you mow after July 1st, you'll have 80% of the birds come off. But if you mow before, you'll have 100% mortality. So there will be some, it's not a perfect solution, but it's better than just having just mowing during peak breeding season. So what we've been able to do is show that we have this sort of quiet period after July 1st. So when we do go out and do our surveys, based on the breeding behavior that we're seeing that either there's either fledglings that are old enough to move out of the way of the mower, or there's just sort of this quiet, possible breeding because you have an individual in suitable habitat, but they're not exhibiting breeding behavior. So we've presented this data, and it may take another field season or something to actually be able to get these dates moved. But that's what our hope is. And if the dates are moved, it would be for all of Pennsylvania, not just for our area. I mentioned the American Mushroom Institute. So the next step with them is we wrote an article with them for Mushroom News in the fall, which got a lot of good feedback. And there are farmers who are interested in formalizing these late mow agreements. So you can see our focal areas outlined there in red, but there are all these other hay fields in Chester County. So this would be an opportunity to expand beyond that focal area. So we're hoping that we can sort of formalize these late hay harvesting agreements and move beyond our immediate area where we're working. So I've thrown a lot at you in the last 45 minutes or so. And so it's a lot to digest, and I'll be happy to answer questions, but I'd like to leave you with this. This is a special place that I've come to know over the last 10 years or so. I've had the good fortune to get to know landowners and farmers who have been generous with their knowledge of the land and have been willing to provide for the birds. And one of our sort of champion landowners, Dee Dee Matz, once told me she's happy to share this special part of the world with others who love nature. And that really stuck with me because that's really the heart of what we're hoping to do, is to share the abundance of this part of the world. So it truly is special. It's the nurturing ground for the enduring cycle of life. And we see the evidence of this through the changing landscape, whether it's walking in the stubby green grasses in April, setting up nets to tag meadowlarks as they awaken the fields from the winter sleep, or starting the first day of the field season with the welcoming song of a newly arrived bobolink, or admiring the wildflowers peeping through the grasses in mid-May, or kneeling in the wet morning grass to release a restless bobolink back to its mate, or watching a colleague disappear in waist-high grasses as she tracks the movements of the birds through the fields, or watching a flock of bobolinks form a fluttering cloud above a field of grass that seems to have all of the colors of the rainbow in it. Or later that same day, seeing a bobolink perch and practically disappear into a wheat-colored sea. Or walking through a field a few days before it's about to be mowed, seeing young birds exhibit strong and steady flights, knowing the nesting cycle is complete. Each of these moments in time is like a puzzle piece, filling in the holes to complete the cycle. They're all linked and they're all necessary. And really, it comes down to these two pictures, which represent the connections around the land and the possibility of coexistence between agriculture and birds. On the left, we see the agricultural productivity of the land, which is really why this area still exists, holding off the pressure of development. And on the right is one of the birds that depends on these working landscapes. And the Grassland Bird Collaboration is working to be the bridge between the two, to work in partnership to create a land ethic for all those who love and use the land. So our work is only possible with the support and cooperation of a network of individuals like this group assembled here tonight. And my hope is that we'll all be inspired to continue to be involved in providing for birds in the ways that we can. Thank you.
Wow, Zoe, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. Really, really, really appreciate it. And
Oh, thank you.
it feels like it's something that's definitely a strong need, especially this concept of trying to find solutions to be able to protect the birds and at the same time have farmers who can make a living on that land. So thank you for all the hard work you're doing, and thank you so much for just the detail and the continuous study that's taking place. It's just really, really kind of amazing. And I guess I have a whole bunch of questions myself, but before we get into it, it looks like so far we have one question having to do with, are there similar efforts in Lancaster County?
I haven't heard any, but that's sort of, as I tried to explain, like that is my hope, that we hope that this will expand beyond where we are. I mean, it also does take, we're a very small organization. Our manpower is limited. So as much as I would love to go all over southeastern Pennsylvania, it's not possible. So if there are researchers out there or farmers or landowners who want to do this, my hope is that maybe they'll know about us. But I haven't really been in touch. Although I will say there is a landfill out there, and I know they're working to manage for grassland birds. I think they get bobolinks that come in during migration in the fall, and then they'll stay there for about a week or so before they move on. So the possibility is there. I don't know how much work is being done there, but if anybody in this group has contacts or connections, I mean, that's my hope, is to, to start to build this network for sure.
Now, I have a couple specific questions, and the first question I have is, I think you had mentioned that the minimum of amount of acreage that would be acceptable for some of these grassland species is about 25 acres, did you say?
Yeah, and that's really at the lower end, and that would really be dependent on the configuration. So you are looking at larger areas for sure.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that if you have, for example, 25 acres, there would have to be adjacent land that would be somehow acceptable for their use at some point in their life cycle. So,
Yeah, or
mhm.
just not feeling, just having some kind of a similarity, I guess. So when I was looking at different measurements of the landscape, um, having being close to adjacent similar land types was important. So, like a 25-acre field that's surrounded by suburban development would most likely not have the birds. I actually live near East Goshen Park, and I was there in the spring, and there were bobolinks there. I was so excited, and then of course they were just passing through because that is in, that's a suburban area. So it just, and they also mow, so it wouldn't have been possible. But yeah.
Here's a question. Did you ever encounter initial friction when approaching some farmers, and what helped resolve it into a more cooperative relationship?
Um, so far I haven't, but that doesn't mean that they didn't feel friction, because I think they were polite. But I did have one farmer that I think, he just had some initial reservations, which I mean, I think that's natural. One of the things that helped to resolve it with him was that his landowner, because a lot of these farmers lease land or have agreements with the landowners, so they're farming multiple properties. And on the one farm, she now, she has fallen in love with her bobolinks. So, it was sort of between them at that point, because she had decided that she wanted to mow later. So then I could kind of step out and let them work that out, which was
Now,
good for me for sure.
one of the questions I have, does it matter what specific grass species are in these fields? Um,
No.
no. Okay.
Well, actually, I should say it doesn't matter if it's native, but in some cases, it seems that they have a preference for the non-native cool season grasses, especially the bobolinks. Um, so um, I think there's been some effort to create meadows with native grasses, and that can be beneficial for other um, organisms. But these grassland birds, they've adapted to the agricultural lands, and really the problem for them isn't so much the plants, it's more just what's happening in terms of the management that's not coinciding. Because really, when you think about grassland birds, the drop off happened around the 1960s, and that's when we had more mechanization of farming. So farming practices were changing, and changing the cycle that had been pretty symbiotic up to that point.
Mhm. And I guess what was my next question is there a late date for the mow? In other words, if we go through the breeding cycle and we're into the first week in July, second week in July, and a mow takes place, can the mow cycle go all the way into the fall winter season?
It can, in terms of the benefits for the birds, just avoiding that breeding time is what's really important. But it it also, a lot of the other pieces of the mowing cycle depend on whether a farmer's trying to get a second cutting. So it's not it has to be done at least annually so that you don't get woody encroachment or something like that. But in terms of would it hurt the birds to wait? No. Actually, we had one landowner who said she was concerned for her farmer because she thought he only got one cutting when he switched over. But they have a lot of fields and they're managing it and thinking about it. So I guess he just wasn't able to get back to that field to in time to have it for a second cutting.
And I kind of asked that question because when I used to work at a particular area that was managing meadows, they would have a cutoff date. The mow would take place between the second week in July, and they would try to get the mow in as quickly as possible so that they would have for the winter season at least a 15 inches of additional growth in
Yeah.
the meadow. So going into the winter as cover, and it would also give time for worm season grasses and other plants to be able to grow and seed and do everything, so that they did have a window where they were looking to kind of keep the meadow at bay, but at the same time give the warm season stuff a chance to respond. And then when the birds would come back in the spring season, there would at least be a little bit of growth in that field.
Right. Yeah. And so that's like the other goals of that habitat beyond, making sure that you're providing those safe dates. But then what else do you want to layer on it? Because I know too, like with natural lands, um, they have some stipulations about fields where there's milkweed, and I think those fields can't be mowed until after August 15th, or I forget what their dates are, but so they're doing, they have multiple management goals and they're trying to have everything kind of align with those goals.
Let's see, we have another question. What are some of the challenges you and your team face when doing the public engagement? And did your team track shifts in farmer and land owner opinions for public education awareness outcomes over time that resulted from your outreach too? Um, is that? I'm trying to think, I guess understanding the metrics of your outreach and how you've been able to track, the success of that.
Yeah. We haven't necessarily been, tracking that in so much of a formal way. Um, I will say that I think there are people who, that it is a change and they're not used to it. And so it's not for everybody. And some people have actually just decided that, no, I really want to mow, even if you tell me I've got all these birds. I do it on this date and that's when I do it. So, that there is human nature and human desires, I guess, that still, that are challenges. But one of the things I think that's been helpful is some of our sort of early adopters have been also very the people who are very plugged into their community, and so they're sort of community figures that, well, I guess if so and so is doing it, then I'm not going to question it, or that kind of thing. And once again, I mean, this is private property, so as much as you might not like your neighbor keeping their grass high or something, you have nothing to say about it. But I will say, I had one um, land manager call me, and the farmer had called and said, can I get in? I was gonna wait until, I don't know, it was after July 4th, but he said the last year was devastating with the drought. And he said, I'm just looking at watching the tonnage just disappear. So can I come in? And I said, well, we're gonna get a survey done. And I can tell you. So we did the survey, the birds were flying well. And so I think he ended up mowing on July 4th. And I had the land manager call, and he said, because it's the landowner's sort of go-between. And he said he really was upset. He said, we don't care about mowing at all anymore. We just want these birds there. He takes his walks in the morning and he loves the birds. And so then it was like sort of trying to be the go-between between a landowner who's saying farming is, your farming is less important than these birds. So it's sort of an interesting position to be in. But I mean, one thing I have noticed is that um, just as these are individual farms, it's each kind of like an individual story that you're piecing together. The agreements are different at each of the farms and different landowners and what they want, what they're willing to do, all of these things. So as the landscape is a mosaic, so are the personalities.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things I really appreciated was the modus research that you're doing, where you're actually tracking the movement of these birds, even within the breeding cycle. And I know you had mentioned about the particular meadow or the staging area, and it just demonstrates just the value of not only doing the research, but we really don't know the full details as to what a particular species needs until you do the research that you're doing. And birds utilize different parts of the habitat at different times of the year, and it's just
Right.
amazing to see how complicated the natural systems can be, and
Yeah,
just phenomenal that you're getting this just solid data as to you know so this is where they're going. They're going to this field, they're going to that field, and and then the tracks on the migration. I mean, it's just wonderful information and data that you're collecting. Just very well done. Let's see. Oh, I have just Zoe, that was a professional, polished, and very interesting presentation. Thank you so much for all you do for sharing your knowledge. I will do my best to pass it along. So,
oh, well, good. Thank you.
as
That's
a matter of fact,
wonderful.
and this is, as I said in my own intro, the heartbreak for me for years has been just that general sense of heartbreak every June when you know that the mower's out, and granted, it might not be bobolinks, but it's at least red-winged blackbirds, and
Mhm.
um, which does bring me to another question about, you know, even if people have, shall we say, meadows, and it might not be 25 acres or whatever, um, I'm assuming there's still a high benefit for at least, maintaining at least a mow cycle that is within that same time frame as the bobolinks or meadowlarks.
Definitely. So actually the president of the Buck and Doe Trust, she has, I think, about 10 acres or so. And so she asked us to come and see what was there. We had suspected that we wouldn't see bobolinks, but she had this wonderful flock of field sparrows that were just, breeding in all areas of the field. And so, and she was willing to delay, although I think her husband was less happy about delaying. Um, but, by her being aware of what we were doing and being willing to make some modifications, she had this group of field sparrows that survived the breeding and are hopefully on the landscape now. So.
Yeah. And I think that, as a general rule, I don't think there would be any harm in not mowing a particular property until after the breeding cycle, as a general rule.
Yes, I don't think there is. I mean, I think what the rub is just if you have other um, goals for the property. That's where you have, maybe some challenges. And then sometimes it's just changing your expectations. So I mean, we've all kind of been exposed to this, Monticello lawn, the
Yeah.
beauty of the Monticello lawn, right? And that's what we have. That's why we spray our grass in front of our house with, all these chemicals. We want to have our own little piece. So you know, even that is just, can you change your vision of what is beautiful? And that's why I like to end with those slides at the end, because it's like you can see that changing landscape. And just you know, I hope that people have an appreciation for what it looks like throughout the season, if it just is allowed to continue to grow. And then when I love to look at them all together, and you see all the beautiful colors of the grass you wouldn't ever think about, you know.
And then every week that meadow is a different color. It's just beautiful to watch this
Yeah.
change. Uh, um, I think that's what all we have for questions at this time. Again, thank you everybody for coming today for the presentation. Thank you, Zoe. And again, for those of you who know somebody who's able to stop by for the presentation, let them know that it's been recorded and you can take a look at it again. So thank you, everybody.
And two, I don't know if when you publicized it, if you put my email address there, but if anybody has any questions that come up, or just want to contact me about the program, I can put it in the chat.
Okay, that would be great.
So and this is through Willistown Conservation Trust. So
Wonderful. Again, thank you so
okay.
much. Thank you for a great presentation, and I'll be in touch with you about some other things in the future.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you for the opportunity to share about these birds.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.